The Chola conquest of Srivijaya did not end Srivijaya reign. It was about resolution of a problem. It was resolved on favorable terms for the Cholas then. But Srivijaya's did not end. In fact, their relationships continue.
Sure.
So that is a very good model, which is why when so many people talk of Indian colonies in that time, I say we must not look at them as colonies, but we must look at them as settlements. That because it is not that you went and tried to impose or force something on people by way of faith, by way of culture, by way of trying to demolish what existed there earlier, and or try and bring something that was a marked departure from what they followed earlier. So it was a good way of assimilation, a good way of local modification. So you will see Ramayana in all these countries, but each has different shades of Ramayana.
Namaste. Welcome to another edition of my sit-down sessions in Sangam Talks. I have today with me Commodore Dr. Srikanth B. Kesnur. He's a VSM, retired after 36 years in the Indian Navy, with experience in maritime operations, training, professional military education, leadership, diplomacy and communication. He's been the captain of two frontline ships, including an anti-submarine frigate, the INS Vindhyagiri. He's been a defense advisor at the High Commission of India based in Nairobi in Kenya. In fact, he was just telling me in our chit chat before we started the interview, that he was there while the anti-piracy operations of the Indian Navy were at its peak, or piracy by the Somalians were at its peak. So we'll probably touch upon that during our conversation today. I have rarely experienced a person who has a PhD and has 5 postgraduate degrees. So sir has this across in science and social sciences, all of that. He's been the director of Maritime Warfare Center in Mumbai. As I said, he's a Vishisht Seva Medal. Now, after retirement, Commodore Srikanth Kesnur has dedicated himself to the cause of spreading maritime awareness, both the history of it as well as Indian Navy's role in many contemporary war situations, anti-piracy and so on and so forth. He's curating some lit fests in Mumbai. Let's see how all of that goes. So how shall we start? Let's go to the sort of ancient history of India. Maybe we'll start there first. Tell us about Lothal, Dholavira. Let's start from that. I mean, we go as far back in our maritime as that, and nobody knows. We are probably the oldest known maritime nation in the world.
I would like to believe, I would like to argue that, because while people talk of the Indus Valley civilization or the Sindhu Saraswati civilization, people talk of the excavations and other part of the city planning and all that, which is of course very good. But not too many people take notice of the fact that right from the Harappan times we have had this maritime links, and that is truly amazing, because it shows that about 4,000, 4,500 years back, perhaps 5,000, depending on how you date the Harappan civilization, that we had maritime contacts and maritime contacts in the west to begin with initially, and at some point of time this civilizational connect kept getting like a relay race baton from the Harappans to the Vedic civilizations to the people who came later, to the Mauryas, to the Guptas, to the South Indian kingdoms, in South India. Continuously, India has had maritime linkages as far west as Rome and Greece in west, the Mediterranean, and of course the Red Sea region and the East African coast, and as far east as Japan and China and Korea, and of course the closer Southeast Asian region and the Bay of Bengal region. So essentially there has been a sort of long maritime tradition of seafaring, of connections across oceans for trade, commerce, culture, and civilizational exchanges. Let's not forget that both Hinduism and Buddhism traveled across the seas. Now, I'm not a culture or religious historian, so I'll leave that part to the experts. But surely this traveled by seas.
Yeah.
And if this traveled by seas, it means that Indians had great seafaring in their mojo.
Yes.
I mean, after all, nobody will go on a one-way ticket. They will go if they know they are assured of safety
Yes.
to come back.
Yes.
They'll go if they are assured of return on investment in whatever they're doing, whether they're building temple, whether they're spreading culture, whether they're trading, there's a return on investment.
I was talking to a commander who's in the Indian Navy serving right now. This is in context of the Stitched Ship project.
Yes.
And we were discussing, my question to him was that I asked him for help in mapping out all the technologies that any modern navy or any shipping industry needs to know for building a ship. Everything on hydraulics to waves hit how big thick the hull has to be. So he drew a tree diagram on this table itself of all the technologies that we need to know to build a ship and to make it travel, make it sail in the seas. So my question was that means that we knew that 4,000-5,000 years ago all of these technologies needed to be known, because without which we wouldn't have traveled.
Absolutely. And to a large extent, let's call it what may be called nautical knowledge.
Okay.
On one hand, certain aspects of shipbuilding, so material, how you build ships, stability and those aspects. There is also knowledge of seas, currents, winds, tides, ports, So there is hydrographic knowledge, there is meteorological knowledge, there is knowledge regarding ports and all that, So I would think, now of course we must remember that this was also a great megapolis, what we call the Indo-Pacific region today. Indians were having exchanges with similar people in other parts of the world, and there were exchanges of best practices, ideas and all that. So all of that was constantly happening, and it was happening in a very nice way, without coercion, there were probably small instances of pirating and profiteering, but by and large in a kind of benign atmosphere of give and take, with India in many ways as the central interlocutor, both because of its geographical position between East and West, and its own indigenous knowledge and traditions. After all, you can't have crossed and done sea voyages without shipbuilding technology.
Yes.
So all of this knowledge, or much of this knowledge and technologies were available in some parts, in some ways. Possibly different kingdoms had different specialities and specifications. Different villages. In fact, since you mentioned the stitched ship, when I was talking to the craftsmen on a recent visit to the shipyard, I learned that many of the villages have specific expertise. So if someone is expert on caulking, then they are there. If someone is on ropes, then that whole family or village builds vertical specialization in that. So certainly there was this knowledge. Now, how and where did that knowledge sort of
got lost,
or did not get transmitted, or got destroyed somewhere in between? We have no idea. So that, or probably we have some surmises, but so that is the problem with regard to our ancient nautical knowledge.
So coming back to talk us through a little bit about the importance of Lothal and the Sindhu-Saraswati civilization and their, what type of ports were these? How large are they? You spoke about a maritime museum that's coming up. So
yes. So a maritime museum is coming up in Lothal, and I'll talk. In those days, Lothal was let's say at the accessible to the seas as a port, which is why,
because the sea was higher.
The sea was higher.
What is now a salt region basically that was the sea coming in.
Yes, the inland sea, but enough for you to navigate. We must remember that in much of ancient and modern times, a lot of this ports were those which were at places where the rivers met the seas or inland met, because either you would have, if they were very bigger ships, they would anchor at sea and smaller boats would go and come, or if they were small enough, they would come. So it's not like you would imagine ports of today's with huge waterfront jetties and stuff like that. So it was a different era, but they still exchanged a lot of stuff. So look, Lothal certainly, and what was then called Maluha for one, they had exchanges. They had exchanges with. We know for a fact that they probably modern day Oman, Arab, Persian world. There were exchanges with regard to imports and exports. So we sent stuff from India, and lot of, say for example, copper came in from Oman. Frankincense came from there. A lot of.
How do we know all this?
So this is written in a lot of, yeah, I mean original historians, or even let's say recent historians. I mean there's someone like Himanshu Prabhare, she has done some good work on India and Oman. More recently, if you want a racy version, Robert Kaplan's Monsoon talks about how Oman, but it is also there in terms of, let's say, the lewd practices. You take a country like Oman, I mean we can discuss other countries too. The rupee was legal tender until 1970. I mean this was the extent of India, Oman, when the Sultan of Oman abdicated, resigned, he actually came to spend time in India from 1932 to a few years or something. So this was a consequence of the old maritime relations that stayed there.
Civilizational memory, I guess.
Civilizational memory, and it's embedded. You go to East Africa, a lot of words or languages. Swahili is supposed to have come from Sahil for coast, or monsoon is supposed to have derived from Mosam. You'll find, for example, in East Africa, Swahili, gun is banduki, trunk is sanduki, shop is duka, shopkeeper is dukawala, okay, republic is jamhuri. So these are all words that come from a common use, of if I can tell you, and this of course transcends just India, it involves a whole space of maritime exchanges. I frequently use this example of samosa to talk about what the Indian Ocean trade in a sense was.
What do you mean?
Okay, now that I have got your attention, वो गाना है, जब तक रहेगा समोसे में आलू मेरा रहेगी ओ मेरी शालू. तो इसका ये अर्थ निकलता है कि समोसा में आलू हमेशा था. That is why it is eternally being preached. But the funny part is samosa and aloo were never together. Samosa came from Arabia, or I believe it was called sambusak there in that region. The aloo came from the Europeans, Latin America, Europe, and then came from there. Some Indian genius mixed the aloo with samosa. Then someone from Punjab made it a Punjabi samosa and added chole. Someone from Bollywood made a song out of that. So this is the way in which culture travels, commercial thing travels. और समोसा के साथ हम क्या लेते हैं? इमली चटनी. Imli is tamarind.
Yes.
Tamarind is tamare Hind, what the Arabs used to call date of Hind.
Oh, okay.
Okay, saying, meaning that ये हिंदुस्तान का date है. The funny part is tamarind is, as I understand it, indigenous to Africa, but came to India long ago.
Okay.
So all of this, my point is, all these exchanges happened by sea. So this glorious multiverse that we constructed in ancient times, in which of course India played a very, very key role because of her knowledge and civilizational status and everything else. But it was a glorious multiverse, and all these exchanges were facilitated by sea and seafarers, by the maritime, so to say.
So the entire on the east, as I understand.
Just to go back to answer your last question, yes, I want to tell your viewers that a magnificent museum is coming up in Lothal. It will probably come up in a year or two. I was associated with it till I was in the Navy because I was heading the Navy's history project. So part of its curatorial committee. A very ambitious project, I think spread over almost 400 acres. From what I know, I've been out of touch for the last couple of years, but we're not going to go back on these plans. It's spread in a huge way. It will have, it has 13 galleries devoted to India's maritime past, right from the Harappan civilization, the Sindhu Saraswati civilization, until modern Indian Navy. And there are outdoor exhibits, indoor exhibits. There's going to be a knowledge center, a seminar.
Pan-Indian, of course.
Pan-Indian, and it is like going to be like a little town. Apparently, the idea, I understand again, that an airstrip will come there soon to facilitate tourism and all that. But this would be India's one of most ambitious museum projects, and something that fronts, showcases our maritime savvy across generations. So I would think that it would be a great thing to go.
Wonderful. Across thousands of years. Okay, let me maybe take a next step. So from the Sindhu Saraswati come to medieval times, or not medieval, but perhaps a little before that, to the Cholas, but also maybe to the Sanjeev Sanyal in his book Land of Seven Rivers and Oceans of Churn later talks a lot about Kalinga and the Bali Yatra and many things. So talk to us a little bit about the empires of the East.
I think we should, and we need to focus on them for 2 or 3 reasons. One is modern India's gaze has started looking east only in recent times because of China or whatever. In some ways, because the bulk of our maritime activity after independence seemed to center on West and things like that. So thoda bahut attention West mein aa gaya tha. So why we need to talk about the East is that while India's West and East coast both had huge amount of maritime connects with different parts of the world, I see 2 fundamental differences in the interactions of the eastern East Coast. First, East Coast had far greater institutional support. The kings, the investors, the merchants. So it was like, you talk of the empires, you talk of Kalingas, you talk of Cholas, you talk of Satavahanas, you talk of Kakatiyas. So there were empires invested with maritime orientation. And I find that very significant, because in modern day India we often say, that our policy makers perhaps are not looking at the maritime very closely. Whether that's right or wrong is a different issue. So that our past maritime kingdoms looked into the seas and looked at how seas could help them in different ways, I think is very, very significant in showing that Indian kingdoms were maritime oriented. The second is, they left a more permanent imprint in the lands they were there. The influence from West has been good, but it's been in cuisine, in modes, in language, as I brought out. Whereas from the East, you had these architecture, you had cultural motifs, you had Angkor Wat, you have Champa, you have the Bali Yatra and its commemoration in Indonesia. So the cultural and civilizational markers of India have been more pronounced through our voyages in the East and in the Near East and Far East. So therefore, I think that we need to talk about Eastern kingdoms a bit more. Kalingas, of course, in some ways immediately after, the Ashokas and all that. And that's remarkable, because that memory of Bali Yatra is still there, and at one point of time it was said that the whole Bay of Bengal used to be called as Kaling Dweep. And it's a great thing. Modern Orias should feel very, very proud about having a ancient kingdom that was seafaring and sea looking for more than 2000 years ago. Then you have also these a whole lot. I mean, you got the Satavahanas, Andhras, you got the Pandyas, the Cheras, and above all the Cholas. And now what Cholas do is, particularly with Rajaraja and Rajendra, so golden 50-60 years, they spread to east to Maldives, they come down south to Sri Lanka, and in 1025, Rajendra Chola goes out and does his expedition to Srivijaya. You know, it is a expression of Indian naval power in distant seas to have sailed across there, and he shows lots of operational savvy in going in. You know, he is expected to come in from the Malacca Strait, and he takes his ships through the Sunda Strait, while he sends one force through the Malacca where the Srivijayas are expecting. So I thought, great show of intent, great show of might, great operational savvy, and that is again a consequence of certain misunderstanding. That misunderstanding is resolved, then the typical Indian way of resolution, not brutal punishment of those people, but a satisfactory resolution of the
Help
problem.
us understand this. Please settle us. That were we these pacifist naval empires who basically never invaded, or we basically extended our dominance on regions? Just help us settle this question. That
Look, it's not for me to settle. I mean, I don't claim one way or other expertise on contentious issues. What I would like to suggest though is that, and this is very clear from the Chola, this one, that the Chola conquest of Srivijaya did not end Srivijaya reign. It was about resolution of a problem. It was resolved on favorable terms for the Cholas then, but Srivijayas did not end. In fact, their relationships continued. So that is a very good model, which is why when so many people talk of Indian colonies in that time, I say we must not look at them as colonies, but we must look at them as settlements, that because it is not that you went and tried to impose or force something on people by way of faith, by way of culture, by way of trying to demolish what existed there earlier, and or try and bring something that was a marked departure from what they followed earlier. So it was a good way of assimilation, a good way of local modification. So you will see Ramayana, in all these countries, but each has different shades of Ramayana.
Yes, but how does that happen without some sense of an imperialist idea?
No, it is.
Is this through trade and intermarriage, and how? What do we know?
All the three. How much I'm doing a bit of surmise based on modern strategic thought. One could be right or wrong about that. It's a combination of all. Relationships through marriage, trade of course, and trading guilds and trade. But it's also about, and this is the fundamental difference, it is about the state investing in trade. Ancient Indian kingdoms did not see trade as antithetical to running a kingdom. I mean, it ran in line with our good civilizational ethos of all dharma, arth, kam, moksha going together. It ran in parallel. So a king actively aided his trading, and that enhanced his influence. So if there were trade disputes that needed to be settled and some force to be shown, it was shown here. If there was some, please remember that when we say, what does trade need? Above all, it needs safety for
the trade.
So we can't say there were no challenges to safety in ancient times. उस वक्त भी pirates हुए होंगे, उस वक्त भी sea पे criminal activities होते होंगे. So what the Indian kingdoms did was, by ensuring safe trade, which meant that there was an element of security in it, an element of sea power in it, you produce that unique alchemy to make Indian influence possible in several parts of the world. Was this imperial? I don't know, because that word imperial has several connotations. But certainly I would think that the Indian kings of that time had imaginations that stretched. I mean, after all, when Rajendra Chola says that I am Gangai Konda Cholapuram and he brings the Ganges down, his sense of geography is moved already to the Ganges. So there are these people whose sense of geography moved eastward too. So I would argue that these were people with a great sense of history, geography, civilization. Did they have a sense of destiny? Probably yes, and I think we should feel proud about it. Whether that would be imperialism as seen in modern day, probably not.
Islamic or British?
Whatever, whichever. European, other, imperialism as understood today or colonialism as understood today, which destroys the basic fabric of that place. I don't think that ever happened.
So, talk to us about, in some of these kingdoms that you mentioned, Kakatiyas, Cholas, Satavahanas, Cheras, are there some tidbits from history, some great naval commanders? Do we know of anything other than the 1025 raid on the
No, so
Srivijaya?
that is actually some of the problem, since I am more of a, let's say, Navy historian with a deep generalist in maritime issues. One of the problems is our inability, both in deep academic studies or in popular studies, to be able to get who were the great maritime heroes of different eras. I mean, of different times. Who were the commanders, for example, who sailed across the seas? You know that Kalinga sailed, right? But who was the great Kalinga admiral? Who certainly the Kalingas would have had. There would be people with sea knowledge, sea experience, things like that. Who took the Chola expedition across? We know about the Chinese admiral, Tunga or Zheng as is called, though he is of the 14th century and 15th century. We know about these people. Unfortunately, in India, other than through stone inscriptions or certain references elsewhere, human descriptions of the vast nature of activities, commercial transactions, Kaun Gaya, who was a merchant, is very little. I mean, Sanyal, of course, gives about some of the princes who came back and things like that. Now, probably this needs study and people have not studied enough. Probably it's there in the original languages, and or probably there's lots of knowledge that is lost. Please remember that there is a whole, you know, in a very separate context. Today, for me as a Navy historian, it becomes very difficult to know about 71 war and get sufficient records. This at a time when record keeping is still okay. So, even then when record keeping is good, there is a 1,000-year gap. Now, in that 1,000-year gap, what might have happened to many of these records, we have no idea. So, that is a bit of a gap, but it is a gap that needs to be bridged by more focused studies on the maritime. In fact, I would request you people to fund some of those, the organizations like Maritime History Society in Bombay and all that, which is started by the Navy, which has this one for this, university maritime departments. In fact, in Orissa last time when this Bali Yatra was happening, so where Sanjeev Sanyal made that announcement of the stitch ship, I was there too, and Shiksha Anushandhan deemed university got into this. So we need probably lot more of academic and intellectual and scholarly studies of the maritime in granular detail. What were the trading records? What were the exchanges? What were the revenues? Who were the commanders? There would be a set of people who by expertise would go and come, like the generals, the Senapati. I mean, we know by the time of Marathas that Angrez is admiral, who were, Daulat Khan was there, this one is there. We know that. Let's say if you ask a normal person who was the admiral of the Satavahanas or who were the great seafarers among the Kalingas, we don't seem to know the name. We don't seem to. I mean, like I said, I'm not a expert on those particular phases, but we don't seem to know, and that is a bit of concern. But I believe we should study that.
That's a good segue into your point about Angre. A good segue into talking about the Marathas. Let's talk a little bit about Shivaji's naval force, Shivaji Maharaj's naval force.
See, particularly important this year because we are commemorating the 350th year of his coronation as a Chhatrapati.
Okay.
So, where Shivaji and Maratha Navy's importance comes is from 2 or 3 areas again. Like you said, you segue from the heights of Cholas and a little bit. Now, unfortunately, after that, by the, let's say, by the 13th, 14th century, Indian seafaring seems to have gone on a decline, at least in terms of institutional support, patronage, all that, right? Why this has happened is again a subject of mystery. We can discuss that later. So, by the time the colonials come towards the end of the 15th century and the beginning of 16th century is when the Portuguese start, our some bit of seafaring is there, but the ability to do battle on seas, to look at seas, as a connector, the Arabs have taken over much of the trade. We seem to have turned inwards or become sea blind, so to say.
Okay.
So by the time the colonials come and establish their kingdoms in different parts in quick succession, resistance to them is there from some pockets, but by and large they are able to hold. And one reason they are also able to hold is that your war fighting capabilities have come close to coast. So those guys can go a little far away and come back and succeed a second time or a third time. The Marakkar, the Kunyali Marakkars of the Malabar coast wage a heroic resistance. Rani Abakar Ulal does some. There are certain local resistance on the west coast. But the real challenge to them comes in some ways through the Marathas, and that is what you might call as a century of the Maratha Navy. If you take from about 1657, when Chhatrapati does his first first expedition to Kalyan and decides to do shipbuilding, till about 1756, the fall of 55 Vijayadurg and Suvarnadurg. Okay, that's about a century of Maratha history. That it has lots of important people, but the two most important people here would be Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj and Sarkhel Kanoji Angre. Now, why is Chhatrapati's thing very, very important? 5 or 6 reasons. A, he's actually a man who comes from the Desh to the coast, breaks through the barriers in the Ghat at a time when probably many of other Indian seafarers are not looking at the sea at all. Remarkable for a person to do that. Okay. Second, please remember his first expedition, Kalyan, is 1657. He's 27 years. At 27, the man is visionary to say, I got to start building ships. And he immediately starts building ship using the Kalyan fort as a base. And within a few years, he builds a huge armada. I mean, by the time of his sad demise in 1680, people say the strength of his navy was about 200 ships, merchant ships were about 200. Some people put a higher figure, but that's amazing. That's amazing. Okay. The Indian Navy doesn't have 200 ships as of today. Okay. So here is a man, and this when he is facing problems,
yes,
he engages Portuguese to work, many of them defect and leave. Okay. He is fighting battles on land constantly. He is fighting the Mughals, he is fighting the Adil Shahis. Okay. At sea, he is fighting the Portuguese, he is fighting the Siddhis, right? So that's amazing. The third is he realizes the use and value of sea. Remember, he personally embarks on his flotilla when that expedition to Basrur happens, I think 1663 or something like that. So he sails all the way to Basrur, leading an armada, some say 70, 80 ships. We have the numbers, which is itself quite huge. But remember, when the other kings used to not do it at that time. He was leading from the front on his ship and then went there and they overcame Basrur, did whatever the army had to do. So that was also an expression of what you call this, taking army troops to land. It's an amphibious expedition. And then he takes over Khanderi 1 year before his death, the great Battle of Khanderi, 1679. Which is, I mean, Khanderi is at the mouth of Bombay. He is overlooking the British on one side and overlooking the Siddhis on the other, So for a man who was with us for 50 years, who was facing huge problems on land, whose mission was the establishment of Swarajya, to bring this notion of supremacy at sea, of control of sea for trade, for security, for everything else, was amazingly perceptive at a particularly sort of, dark time for seas or seafaring in India. And he also got that in his statecraft. I mean, Ramachandra Pantya Amatya, his minister, says that, Navy is an independent arm of the state. So, doctrinally, they are seeing the Navy having a role in the affairs of the state. Remember, the state capital at that time is, in various places within Desh and outside. Of course, Raigad he establishes and all that close to the coast, he's coronated there. So, I think he was not just a maritime warrior, he was a great maritime visionary, and we don't recognize sufficiently that aspect of him. So, self-reliance ho, या far दूरदर्शी vision ho, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, I think, is big on these things when he was having so many other challenges. And then of course we can speak of Angre. Now what, mind you, there are these in between chapters. I think constraints of time don't allow us to do that. But Sarkhel Angre, Kanhoji Angre is great because many of these lessons he takes it further. One, remember, he becomes an admiral at a particularly critical time when the Maratha land power is slightly waning till the death of Aurangzeb because of the fights between the two factions, Now, he first, because of his professional excellence and because of certain, let's say, as people say, that certain friendship with the Peshwa, ultimately he is able to get recognition as a Sarkhel by both the factions, Of course, after the decline of Mughal power and all that, at sea he starts getting better and better. Now is when the Portuguese and the British are equally powerful and the Siddhis are there. So what does Sarkhel do? 3 or 4 very, very important things. One is he reintegrates in some ways the fleets that had been divided after Chhatrapati's time. Second and most important, he is now a sea warrior. Unlike the other Marathas who have this great view of the sea, but are not necessarily, not all of them, some of them in fact complain that the boats don't behave like the horses when they fight. Kanhoji Angre is a man of the seas. He is born to the coast, born of the seas, he has the sea in his veins, so he knows. So he has this one of how to do. I mean, he has his early experiences of the failed battle of Padmadurg launched by Sambhaji Maharaj and all, and he learns lessons there, So what Sarkhel Angre does is, one is, please remember, till his death in 1729, he is undefeated in any naval battle. Many of us don't register that, And in 1721, there is actually a joint English and Portuguese, battle against him, and he overcomes them. Okay. Many of us think, hum bolte hain, no, this Europeans were first defeated in 1905 by Asian power, by the Japanese-Russo war when they beat the Russians. That I think that's the Toshima Straits, if I'm not wrong. So here Kanhoji Angre was beating, and of course later 1741 also, I think, when that Travancore and Kolachal happened. But the point is, what did Sarkhel do? He challenged the domination of Portuguese and Britishers to the seas. And for this, not only he refused to pay the kartas, the license and tax that the colonials had imposed. The colonials had imposed that you need to have this certificate from us if you have to use the seas. Not only he challenged that, but look at his savvy, look at his chutzpah. He started his own system of license, the dastak and the call. So look, this is issue of state sovereignty. And the great part about Sarkhel is that he said, I am always acting on the instructions of the Chhatrapati. So the coins and all that he minted, which talked about him, were that the loyal servant of the Chhatrapati.
Even after?
Even after being a great admiral.
No, but even after the death of Shivaji?
Yes, yes. He continued his loyalty to the, as far as Sarkhel Kanoji Angre's loyalty to the empire is concerned, I don't think anyone has said anything. Even the loyalty of his children was never in doubt.
Yeah.
It was simply a question of misunderstanding with the later Peshwas that led to the Peshwas and Angre's falling out. I don't think any of them had issues about loyalty or fidelity to the idea of Swarajya or Maratha Empire. Their interpretation of who, I mean, as I see it, again, better historians of the Marathas would be able to tell this, because this is about political issues of the Marathas. But as I understand it and as I see it, fidelity to the empire or to the idea of Swarajya was never an issue. It was misunderstandings. Surgeon Commander Uday Kulkarni, a great authority, he says these were misunderstandings. But whatever it is, if we come back to Sarkhel, so he was a great warrior, he was a great fighter. Okay, he was regarded. I mean, the English people gave him the ultimate compliment when they say he's a pirate, he's a unke. If you are a big arch villain, that means you're making life miserable for him. So he remained undefeated. He took the idea of Swarajya, the Maratha flag. Again, self-reliance. Lot more shipbuilding happened during his time. Most importantly, this is when the guns start coming in. So he takes in cannons. There are these Maratha designs of Gurab, Galvat, Pal, all Maratha ship designs.
Oh,
which are
indigenous ship designs.
Absolutely, absolutely. They have guns mounted on them. They take Portuguese technology. They take European technology. It's not always as good as them.
How do they do that? By hiring them or?
By hiring, pragmatism. So the Marathas were also very, very pragmatic. If they could take best practices from other people, they took it. Remember, they had to fight a war.
Yes.
So they were not, idealism without pragmatism is of no use.
Yeah.
So they had to fight a war.
Jingoism is not important.
Yeah. They had to fight, and same thing, they had problems on land. Kanoji Angre was fighting the Portuguese, he was fighting the British, he was fighting the Siddhis of Janjira, he was fighting the Savans of Savandwadi, the Dutch were there at Mengurla. So he was fighting a lot of people, In fact, the Maratha Empire, if you see throughout, they were probably amongst the busiest in terms of fighting. So this thing, his ability to build ships, have guns imposed on them. We were now moving into an era of cannons and guns.
And these ships were not stitched anymore.
No, they were not stitched anymore. By now you have come into the nail technology and all that much in this one. And he would take. But tactics, one of the most important part about Kanoji Angre's navy was that they knew that bigger European ships with more equipped guns at open seas will be a problem. So they would do guerrilla tactics at sea, ambush them, thrust and parry, draw them closer to the coast, and a lot of raw courage. You can't do all this without raw courage. But for courage, you need inspirational leadership. So it was an alchemy of all that, that again he produced.
Two most important men.
Absolutely, and it is sad that we should have lot more about. I wish there was a grand movie on
Chhatrapati Shivaji and
Angre.
Sarkhel Angre. So I guess for time and continuity, we'll end this particular session over here and hopefully continue into modern times on another sitting whenever the opportunity arises, and we'll go into the modern Indian Navy's role, including in the Pakistan battles and so on and so forth. I think we'll split this into 2 or 3 sessions would be wonderful.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed this session. Hope you all enjoyed this session. Sir will be, once the video is live and you all see it, hopefully sir, you can come and comment, and there'll be people commenting, maybe asking questions. So please do engage with them on the comment section.
Sure.
Thank you very much. If you have questions for sir, please leave them in the comment section and hopefully he'll answer.